Welcome to the Jim Acosta Show. It's another day that ends in Y in Donald Trump's district of corruption. Trump now claims he doesn't know the people he is pardoning now. The American people, though, they are starting to figure this out. They are catching on and blaming Trump and the Republicans for the shutdown more than Democrats. That's according to the latest NBC poll. My first big guest this hour is the amazing American historian, Heather Cox Richardson, whose insights are always so valuable. Heather, it's great to see you again. Thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, Jim.
And so there was a part of me that did not want to focus on the 60 Minutes interview because I was infuriated almost the entire time I was watching it. But his comment about not knowing that he was pardoning the Binance guy, to me, was astounding. And, we're just living in this second Gilded Age. I did want to show the viewers at home, this image from Mar-a-Lago. I guess it was Halloween night. They were doing The Great Gatsby as a theme for the party at Mar-a-Lago, and he just doesn't care anymore. I mean, he obviously hasn't cared for some time, but he's really just letting it rip. I mean, he is just. It's not let them eat cake; it's let them eat shit. It seems to me. He is just doesn't matter. We're just gonna do this Great Gatsby thing all across the country. The poor be damned, the hungry be damned. We're gonna get ours. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, you're not showing there the image of the young woman in the cocktail
I
glass,
saw that.
or the image of the young women dancing, very scantily clad, for the guests at Mar-a-Lago, which I think is actually part of the story as well. I think
Yeah,
speaking of not caring any longer,
yeah,
having those images at a time when the Epstein files are still hanging out there was very much a way to say to people, like, expletive you, I think,
exactly.
basically. In addition to
Right.
some other stuff going on with that. But if you let's put those two things together. You think about the idea of a Great Gatsby party hours before Americans are due to lose their supplemental nutrition assistance program benefits that 42
Right.
million Americans rely on. And these are people who are, these are children, these are disabled, these are people who are working full time. These are really important to all Americans, these
Yeah.
SNAP benefits. And people have paid a lot of attention to the contrast between Gatsby's world and the world of the poor that are also in that novel by F. Scott Fitzgerald that came out in 1925. But one
Right.
of the things that I haven't really seen mentioned is, do you remember what Gatsby did for work? Where the money
Mm.
came from?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, huh? Gatsby was a bootlegger. Gatsby was a criminal.
Yes.
This was prohibition. And Gatsby was a criminal, and he worked with or was associated with, in the book, a fictional character, but in the analog in United States history, the man who is alleged to have fixed the 1919 World Series.
Mm.
Well, didn't something happen this weekend?
Yeah.
Throwing a Gatsby party
Yeah.
the same weekend as the World Series, as people are running out of SNAP benefits,
Yeah.
with a man who is just pardoned the world's richest crypto backer. He's the guy who started Binance, was
Right.
so in your face. It strikes me as being A, sort of designed that way, but B, if you look at the rest of that interview that Trump did with Nora O'Donnell of CBS News, that was recorded on the 31st of October,
Yep.
um, the man doesn't know if he's a foot or horseback. He's not all there.
Yeah.
So who's running the show? And the message that they are sending as they are running the show is, I think, something we ought to be grappling with.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and we should dive into that. I mean, he pardoned Changpeng Zhao, the billionaire founder of the cryptocurrency exchange, which, by the way, people forget about this, pleaded guilty to money laundering violations in 2023. Also, the same company that struck a huge business deal with the Trump family. And so Nora O'Donnell asked, what about pay for play? Is this pay for play? Because this is one of the more astounding things I've ever heard from a president, saying that he's pardoned somebody who he doesn't know. I've talked about the 25th Amendment on this show. I think, Donald Trump and his people, the way they went after Joe Biden with the auto pen and questioning who's really running the show, who's really pulling the strings inside the Biden White House. If Donald Trump he's either corrupt and lying, which he is, or he's losing it, or both. And I mean, to me, you know, this reeks of hypocrisy because it sounds as though what's happening is that they're just putting pardons in front of him and oh, okay, sure. Oh, they're doing business with Donnie and Eric. Okay, sure. That's fine. I'll do it. That's that's not a commander in chief who is in charge.
Well, yes, I think it's the old thing about every accusation is a
Yeah.
confession, right? So
Right.
there is
Right.
that. But you also wonder if they're putting the stuff out there that they are now about former President Joe Biden because they are trying to soften the blow of just how bad Trump is right now. I will point
Yes.
out that in that interview, in the transcript that was released of that interview, which was not itself complete, Trump
Yep.
mentioned Biden 42 times. I mean, the man was on a loop. It was all about how terrible Biden was, how great Trump was, and he really did not engage with questions. And what you just
Yep.
showed was not the same as the transcript, which itself is interesting considering the fact that Trump sued CBS for allegedly
Yep.
changing a transcript that Vice
The
President,
editing.
the
Yep.
editing of the Vice President Kamala Harris. But in fact, he stammered quite a bit when O'Donnell said, "What do how are you getting around accusations of pay to play?" And he said, "I didn't want you to ask this question," because they'd had an argument about whether, not an argument, they'd had a discussion about whether or not she could ask another question. So even what you showed was significantly cleaned up. But it's not just about pardons. Like,
Yeah.
what else is happening in that White House that is being directed by people who were not elected by the American people and may or may not have our interests in mind? And I keep coming back to the fact that when the White House invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, Trump said later he had not done it. And yet
Yeah.
it's signed in the Federal Register with
Right.
his name. So either he doesn't remember it or somebody else signed it. And, you think about the things that are happening and the number of times we hear the White House did this or the administration did that, or sometimes
Right.
even Trump did that. And then as you work your way down through the information, it turned out that the person really pushing things was Stephen Miller, the Deputy White House Chief of Staff,
Yes.
or was Russell Vought, the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, or perhaps in this case, Don Jr. and Eric Trump. I mean, we don't know. We just
Yeah.
don't know.
That's exactly right. I mean, and just the other day on this, cognitive decline issue, he was confusing an IQ test with the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Test. And he was bragging about how he aced his cognitive tests, and he was accusing AOC and Jasmine Crockett of not being able to compete with him on an IQ. He's just mixing these things up, and it just sounds like to me. I mean, just to be in the most charitable way possible, it just sounds like somebody who is slowing down and just isn't really, he's just not all there. He's just
No,
not all there. Yeah.
no, and he's been talking about those cognitive tests since 2018. So this has
Right.
been going on for a while. But
Yeah.
even so for me, even if he is in terrible shape, which I think he is, not being a doctor, but having had
Yeah.
family members with dementia, seeing similarities between their behavior and his, the question remains, what are we going to do about it? Because
Right.
the fact that we have a president who is in this shape, performing the way he is, doing the things he is doing. Today, when we're recording this, which is Monday, November 3rd, it appears the administration is blowing through the deadline for the president to ask the approval of Congress under the War Powers Act from 1973 for permission to continue his attacks on Venezuela. And they're simply saying we don't have to do that. So long as we use drones, we can attack anybody we want. Well, that's just bonkers. But
Yeah.
if that's the case, things that any other president, I'm sorry, let me interrupt myself.
Yeah.
He knocked down the freaking White House.
He knocked down the freaking White House.
If that had been Biden, he would have been impeached and convicted within 2 days.
That's right.
If
That's
that's
right.
not going to happen, what are we going to do about it?
Well, and that's part of the reason why I think that there's something wrong because he's just acting in ways people who have had family members who go through dementia and these types of issues can relate to some of the behavior and whatnot that we're seeing. I mean, but getting back to the corruption issue, which I think is probably the most undercovered thing right now,
Right.
is the corruption that is swirling inside this administration. The Washington Post, which is still a shell of its former self, does occasionally have some good stories from time to time. One of the ones that they put out today is it says this, that many publicly identified donors to Trump's ballroom over in the East Wing that they knocked down have high stakes business deals before the administration, ranging from billions in contracts to federal investigations of their companies, according to a report released Monday by Public Citizen. More than half of the companies that donated are facing or have recently faced federal enforcement actions tied to alleged wrongdoing. And so people are just paying money to his ballroom to get to get out of hot water on a whole range of issues when the government is coming down on them. And so, I mean, this to me it's like this. It's like going back to the Gatsby picture. It's just another gilded age that we seem
Right.
to be living through. And the most corrupt president we've ever had happens to
Right.
be the president at the same time.
Well, the
Yeah,
two go hand in hand, right? And
that's right.
and why did CBS News pay him the sum of money it did for allegedly
Right.
misediting the Kamala Harris interview? Because they had a merger in front of the
Correct.
administration. So, I mean, absolutely, this is extraordinary corruption, and I agree with you. I think maybe the crypto stuff isn't getting covered as much as it should be because it's very hard to understand. If you're not involved in that world,
Right.
it's easy to miss the difference between an exchange and the currency, and a stable coin and a meme coin, and all the different kinds of coins, and where the money's coming from, and what's stable and what's not. And I think people just kind of throw up their hands around that. But in
I
fact,
agree.
we know that going into this administration, the President Trump was in real trouble for money, and now he is floating in it thanks to cryptocurrency.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to get to is, in terms of that 60 Minutes interview was, the way he seemed to be saying, I mean, he did say that the ICE enforcement actions are not going far enough. Because, along with the rot that is going on inside this country when it comes to corruption is the rot that is going on when it comes to our national character, I believe, and our ability to say that is cruelty. We're not going to be a part of this. And Donald Trump last night basically said, I mean, these horrific ICE videos that we're all seeing flooding into our social media feeds these days. He's saying that those tactics that we've all seen, people being tackled, their windows being smashed, and so on, aren't going far enough.
Right. In
Yeah,
fairness, it's a little hard to stop that flood.
that's right.
And
That's right.
so
I
she
agree.
was trying to push back, but no, he straight up lied. But I actually think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And in that, you and I know what's going on. We follow social media. We see these stories. We read a number of different documents about what's happened. What is Trump seeing? He
Yeah.
gave an interview with Yamiche Alcindor, I think it was last month, in which he said that he had talked to the governor of Oregon, who said that, in fact, what he believed was happening in Portland was not. And we know
Right.
that the Fox News channel showed a video clip of what purported to be a recent video of Portland, and it was not. It
It
was
was not.
intercut with
Right.
images from 2020. Now, similarly, we know that in the last few days, the Fox News channel has shown AI videos, theoretically, of Black American women. I forget what it was, something about their demands for SNAP payments. You wonder, and again, if you look at what the Department of Homeland Security is showing in those videos that it shows, in which it seems to indicate things like the attack on the apartment building in Chicago is in fact an attack on people that they have tricked out to look as if they are malefactors, right?
Right.
So you wonder if there is. I mean, I don't know. I will tell you one place I stand very firm is I have no doubt that in 25 years there's going to be a slew of books about who was really pulling the strings here and
Yes.
how Trump became convinced of something that wasn't real. And you just kind of wonder what he thinks is happening. If you remember and you listen to the way he talks, he sounds a great deal like Stephen Miller, who is
Yes.
convinced that anybody of color is, by definition, a criminal, especially if they came across the government without documentation.
So it sounds as though, Heather, I mean, and this ties back to what we were saying at the top of this, that if you go through the 60 Minutes transcript, and I heard, I saw a post from SV Date, who is a great reporter for the Huffington Post and is over at the White House covering that beat every day. I used to know when I was over there myself. He put out a post that said, if you look at the 60 Minutes transcript of the interview, this is the Donald Trump that America needs to see. It wasn't the one that was on display during the 60 Minutes interview with the favorable editing that he accused
That's right.
60 Minutes doing with Kamala Harris. And he does sort of have this tendency. And I noticed this back when I was covering him the first time around. And he's obviously worsened since then, where he just runs through the greatest hits in his head. What he sees to be the greatest hits, what he sees as the things he can say in any given moment to sort of get himself out of any sort of a question. And sometimes he just flat out lies and says, I didn't know that guy that I pardoned. And it seems to be that is exactly what you're talking about. And it makes me I think it's a very important question because it seems to me the thing that they accuse the Biden people of doing, they themselves are now doing.
Yes, and he doesn't
Yeah.
have anybody around him to provide the kinds of guardrails that will keep a presidency on an even keel. To the
Yeah.
contrary, we have a presidency that is blowing through legal guardrails right and left. And one of the things that really showed up again over this weekend is the administration's real determination to get the Democrats to cave to their wishes on the continuing resolution to fund the government
Yeah.
by creating extraordinary pain for the American people. And
Yes.
now that a judge, two federal judges have said that the government must use the emergency reserves in the Department of Agriculture to fund the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program for the month of November, with the potential for using another pot of money, another $23 billion. What did we see today? We saw the administration doing the absolute minimum it could. At the
Right.
same time, you're seeing healthcare premiums go through the roof. And now on the horizon, the idea that the shutdown will hit home heating as winter starts. And then you had Sean Duffy, the transportation secretary, saying he was thinking about grounding the entire air fleet. I mean, they are literally trying to force the American people to do what the figurehead of Donald Trump wants. And yet, is it really Donald Trump doing this? The whole thing is just a dumpster fire that
It's you're absolutely it's a total dumpster fire. And to your point, I mean, NBC has a new poll out that shows 52% of voters blame Trump and the Republicans versus 42% blaming the Democrats. And I think that the folks at home are catching on to exactly what you're saying, which is they don't like this idea of Trump holding the poor over the barrel. Of holding the hungry in this country over a barrel and saying to the Democrats, well, if you don't go along with this and help us reopen the government, poor people are going to go without food stamps and SNAP benefits. They're going to go without all sorts of other public assistance benefits, and the American people are just not. They're not going to go along with that. And I think the other thing that you put your finger on, and to me, it is kind of the whole ball game, is whether or not the Trump administration is going to abide by these judges' rulings. What happened today was the administration said, yes, we'll go ahead and start paying for some of these benefits out of the 4.65 billion in contingency funds that will cover about half of each eligible household's benefits this month, but they're not willing to do more than that. And so there it's this thumbing their noses at the judges just every step of the way. It makes you wonder, can our constitution handle this? Can our way of life, can the checks and balances sustain this?
Well, I guess that remains to be seen, but I will
Yeah.
point out, you mentioned the 25th Amendment. That's not going to happen under this current
Mm-mm.
administration because you got to have a lot of cabinet members signing on to it, and they are not going to do it. But the Republicans, the Senate Republicans, could stop this any freaking time they wanted to.
That's right.
And that's a place to keep pressure up because, again, I think it was just yesterday that former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, a Republican in Kentucky, actually came out and said, we have a Nazi problem and I paraphrase, that's not exactly what he said,
Yeah.
but the increasing amount of support among MAGA Republicans for Nazi language and perhaps for Nazism itself is, I think, also alienating a lot of people who might have voted for Trump because they were upset about the inflation under the Biden administration and are now seeing, groceries are up 1.4%. Halloween candy was up almost 10% this year.
Oh,
They're
it's so
seeing that,
expensive. Yeah.
yeah. And they're saying, wait a minute, we kind of thought we were in this for some, some cheaper goods, or at least that they wouldn't be getting more expensive. You remember he promised that he'd have prices lower on day one. And
Yeah.
instead we've got Nazis, and that's really not what we were looking for here. So I think we're in a really interesting moment where you've got, I think there's real questions among the Democrats about what they're going to stand for, and questions from the Republicans about what they're going to stand for. And when we've done this in the past, the 1850s, the 1890s, the 1920s, during the Gatsby era, what
Yeah.
we ended up with was a reassertion of American democracy in a new form. And every time one of these pieces moves, and I watch people react as if it were 20 years ago, I think, I can't tell you what's going to happen. I mean, you can see
Yeah.
the echoes of the past, but I think we still have opportunity to build a new future. What that's going to look like, I think we have no idea.
I don't think we have any idea at this point. We have these elections tomorrow in Virginia and New Jersey and New York. And in California, people overlook, if you're not in California, you might overlook California. They're going to vote for this proposition very likely to allow the redistricting of that state to keep up with what the Republicans are doing in these other states. And I sort of wonder what you think about what we're going to see in these elections, because to me, the Mamdani thing is very interesting. Yeah, I think it's very important what's going to take place in New York. And, when you see the Cuomos in cahoots with the Trumps to try to stop something from happening in New York City, something important is going on. And they want to make, Trump calls him a communist on 60 Minutes and all this stuff. And the desperation is kind of showing there a little bit. They're afraid of this.
Right, and just be clear, the person who's acting like a communist right now is Donald Trump, who's
Is
taking
Donald Trump?
pieces
That's
of the
right.
of American companies. Yeah, but one of the things we don't talk nearly enough about in America is generational change.
Yeah.
That is, often you get a period when there is, for one reason or another, one generation seems to hold on longer than people expected it to, and of course, this generation has hung on longer than many have been able to in elected office because of increased access to transportation and better health care since World War II.
Yeah.
They can hop on an airplane and go to Washington for the weekend. And of course, that's also broken down the familial and sort of friendship ties in Washington. But what we're seeing, I think, is a much older generation, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, they came up through a different world than today's young people did. And you're seeing that younger generation, and their world is just different. They grew up with the
Yes.
internet. They grew up with, after the Civil Rights Act, they grew up with shootings in schools. And what they will come
Trump.
up with, they came
Yeah.
up with Trump. That's a really good point. A lot of people who are voting now don't remember a world without Trump. And they don't remember when democracy worked. So
Yeah.
that is, if you're under 55, you don't remember the period before the 1980s. So, who knows what they're going to do? But a lot of that
Mm.
animosity is, they can't possibly have good ideas. Whereas, somebody who gets to sit on the sidelines and look at American history goes, listen, it might not have been the solution I'd have picked, but young people do a pretty good job when you turn them loose and let them grapple with their world. I mean, look at the
That's
framers of
right.
the Constitution.
Yeah. No, and I tell people all the time, I covered the Obama campaign back in 2008, and I would go out there. This is during the Obama versus Hillary days back in 2008. And I had all these smart people at my old place tell us there's no way that Barack Obama is going to take this thing from Hillary Clinton. It's Hillary Clinton, and she's going to do it no matter what. And the establishment's on her side, and so on. And I would be in these auditoriums and these gymnasiums and so on with Barack Obama. I listened to the way he was speaking. And it was, younger people than myself. I was in my mid 30s at that time, younger people than myself who were just like, they were just mesmerized. And I thought to myself, you might think Hillary Clinton's going to run away with this thing, but I don't know. It seems like this hope and change guy might have something here. And I tell people this all the time. You might think that we're all down in the dumps and just nothing's going to change, nothing's going to work out. And then out of nowhere, boom, something happens. I'm not saying Mom Donnie is the next Obama or anything like that, but you're absolutely right. Younger generations will shop around when they're pissed off and they feel left behind, and they will start something in this country.
More than that, they will shape the leaders who rise. So,
Yes.
this idea, for example, that Abraham Lincoln came down from the heavens for America is just absolutely wrong. In
Mm,
1854, he had one undistinguished term in the House of Representatives. He was a corporate lawyer, but he listened to how upset people were when it appeared that the elite enslavers were going to take over the American West and make human enslavement national. He listened to the arguments, he absorbed the arguments, he talked to people, and by 1859, he was ready to articulate a new kind of political party. We created him, and
mm.
we are creating the people that are rising now. And people are make really early choices about who they're going to back for one candidate or another, and I'm like, no, at this point, throw them all out there, put them all
Yeah.
out there, let's hear what everybody has to say. And for, like you say, whoever ends up being the next great voice, we might not even know who that is yet. We
I think
might,
that's
but we may not, and that's kind of fun.
I think it's great, and it gives me hope, and I think people should have. I know I'm a foolish optimist, but I do think people should still have hope. This way we do things in this country does very often produce good results. And Heather, you know that more than anybody. It's just stubborn, and it takes a while, and it's frustrating as hell. But Heather, it's great to see you as always. Thank you so much, Heather Cox Richardson. We could go on and on and on, but I feel like I'm stealing too much of your time as it is.
Well, thanks. Let's do it again soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks a
Thanks,
lot.
Heather.